Hi everybody, you're watching Expressive Photography and I'm Alister Benn. Thanks for tuning in again. Last week we started to look at the concept of frustration and why it is so easy for us to get frustrated and feel dissatisfied with our photography. And in particular, we looked at the whole concept of popularity and the drive or striving for popularity as being ultimately or potentially ultimately quite detrimental for our creativity, our expression, our self-esteem, and our happiness as a photographer. This week, I would like to look at the whole concept of locations, being envious or frustrated at not being able to go to some of these special locations that other people are making incredible photographs at, but also the cost of that, the cost of going and how that can play out if we ultimately don't get what we hope to achieve. I think the first thing we need to consider is, can we be honest with ourselves? Can you be honest with yourself as much as I try to be honest with myself? When we go to these locations, why are we going? What is the motive for going? There's a lot of people who I do speak to who talk about going to beautiful places around the world, some of which are incredibly famous for photography, whether it's Yosemite or the Rockies or Lofoten, Iceland, my very own or our very own west of Scotland, north coast of Spain, Namibia, all over China and the Himalaya. There's locations all over the world that people go to on a regular basis to make photographs because they've seen photographs by other people that inspire them and motivate them to do two things. One is to either go and experience that place for its raw natural beauty, its majesty, its wilderness, it's the whole experience of going. Some of those experiences aren't pleasant, as I can attest, having spent an awful lot of years above 5,000 meters, for example. Quite often you don't feel great, but there's a very profound experience of being there. The second reason we go to these locations is to get specific images that we have seen by other people because we believe them to be inspiring, motivating, and we go to these locations to try and achieve something very specific. I'm going to show you some examples of some of these locations around the world that I've been fortunate enough to go to and talk about some of the experiences I had in those places and where I benefited from it, and sometimes the downside of going to these places and the negative aspects of it as well. When I first started photography, I was living in the Far East, in particular I was in China, and I'd seen lots of photographs of the rice terraces down in the south of China with incredible light reflected in these water-filled rice terraces. There are very specific times of the year to go to experience them when they're flooded as opposed to when they've been planted or when they're being harvested. It's very time specific. And subsequently, thousands of Chinese photographers used to go at a specific time. And I, of course, went at the right time to experience them as I wanted to photograph them based on the photographs that I had seen. The reality of that situation was it took me 3 days from where I lived in China to go to this location, enduring Chinese buses and various other exciting things that happen. And I sat inside a ping pong ball for 3 days, totally enveloped in cloud, sitting with hundreds of other people at the sunrise location or the sunset location and basically seeing nothing. And every time the wind would get up, everyone would get excited and rush to their tripods thinking that it was going to clear. I remember profoundly the moment that it did clear, and I was somewhere on my own actually, and this was the photograph I took, and I was so ecstatic about this, seeing the rice terraces for the very first time, having been there for 3 days and not seeing anything. So the sense of relief and reward and aesthetic fulfillment was huge. Had I not seen the rice terraces at all, had I sat inside a ping pong ball for another week, ultimately you get kind of frustrated. You feel pretty awful. There didn't seem to be anything else to photograph. It was just all fog. And of course we stayed And we did get some wonderful sunsets and saw this beautiful red light reflecting in the rice terraces. And, the more you zoom in, the more abstract you get. But ultimately, I don't think I made many photographs on those first couple of trips to these rice terraces that hadn't been made a dozen times before, hundreds of times before, by Chinese photographers over the decades. The same goes for some other locations in China. This particular photograph is taken in another area of southern China, famous for these limestone karsts, these pinnacles. And obviously when they rise out of the fog, and you just get this very incongruous, beautiful landscape. I lived in this location for a year without experiencing this, and it wasn't until about 5 years later that I went back scouting for a workshop, actually, to see these events. It is not unusual for us to pin our entire reflective nature of the experience on the photographs that we make. We can go to these places and not see them. I unfortunately took a workshop to this particular location, and we climb up these very, very high limestone karsts in the dark to get up to the area for sunrise, and you're sitting inside a ping pong ball again. People investing thousands of dollars to fly across the Pacific to get to China, to go somewhere to see a specific thing, and when it doesn't happen, it's obviously very demoralizing. It can be very soul destroying. And it was very difficult during that trip to keep, a perspective on the fact that we were still healthy enough to go and climb these mountains. I think what we have to consider is that there's a financial cost to traveling across the world, or even within your own country, to go to places to shoot specific things when that event is weather dependent. If you want to go somewhere on the west of Scotland or Iceland, for example, or if you want to go and photograph aurora, or if you want to go and photograph mist going through mountains like in Yellow Mountain in China, if you don't get the conditions that are conducive to those types of photographs, it's very difficult to rationalize that it's been a fun and exciting thing to do. It may have cost you literally tens of thousands of dollars in some cases, plus all the time you take off work, time away from your families, and the equipment that you may have bought specifically to go to these places. It can be extraordinarily difficult to be honest with ourselves and say, I actually feel happy about that experience, even though I didn't make those photographs that I had hoped to make. By the end of 2016, I'd been fortunate enough to be running a successful tour and workshop business for a number of years, and got to go to a lot of incredible places, running trips in Iceland, the west of Scotland, northern Spain, Tibet, Yellow Mountain, lots and lots of incredible places, and had been to a lot of these places and experienced wonderful light. But one of the other things about running workshops is that it's not always perfect light. Quite often it can be cloudy or raining or blowing a gale. And of course you can't just say to people, no photography today, we're just going to stay in and eat toast and watch daytime TV. People have travelled to go to a location to experience the location, and this is where, if we're honest with ourselves, there are aesthetics associated with changeable weather, dynamic weather, dramatic weather that is very different from the kind of classic golden light that society tells us is the only way to make landscape photos. So like I said, by the back end of 2016, I felt I had been to a lot of these incredible places and had my, an incredible opportunity seeing them in all this incredible light, as well as lots and lots of days in terrible conditions as well. But I think ultimately I was still lying to myself that I only looked on it as a good day if I'd got the conditions that I'd hoped for. I was measuring the success or the value of my time in the field based upon the quality of the photographs I was making. Now, this is where the evaluation of the quality of the photographs is so important. If they tick the boxes of achieving what I had gone there to achieve, be that, pointy mountain in glorious light and then processing it in a way with lots of glowy fog and glowy light, then that was the aesthetic that I was striving for. And ultimately I got very dissatisfied with that. As many of you may know, I went to the Gobi Desert for the first time in the early part of 2017, and because I was incredibly depressed about life, the universe, everything, and my own expectations, I had a very interesting time really, because I stopped making photographs that, well, I'd never seen any photographs of this location, so I was going in there very much raw. And what I found was that my definition of meaningful photography, of photographs that actually tick the boxes inside myself, of being in a place, experiencing that place, seeing it for what it is, accepting it for what it is, great light, bad light, soft light, harsh light, high contrast, low contrast, misty, rainy, foggy, you name it, it didn't matter to me because the experience of being there was still an important thing for me to be doing. I think what this allows us to do is to have a far more relaxed relationship with our expectation. If we go to a place expecting it to deliver the shots that we've seen on Instagram or in other people's books or in magazines, if that is what we go to achieve and we feel dissatisfied with any other result, then frustration is the only outcome. You are not going to feel good about the experience. You're not going to feel good about going. You're not going to feel good about any aspect of it. And you're always going to be thinking, I could have spent that money on something else, or I could have gone somewhere else. Of course, I'm not going to dissuade anybody from traveling around the world to go to beautiful places. Why would I? I mean, there are many places around the world I haven't been yet that I would love to go purely to see them, because beautiful places are indeed beautiful, and the majesty of the mountains, or the atmosphere by the ocean, or the solitude in the desert, these are all wonderful things to go and explore aesthetics and to explore experiences. I think what I would caution people against, though, is putting too much stock in other people's photography. It's very easy to go to places with this image of what we're going to achieve based on other people. And this is what I want to approach in next week's video, the third part of the frustration complex, which is being made or being frustrated by other people's creativity. The whole concept of locations is a very, very simple one. During lockdown, as I said in last week's video, more and more of us started to photograph closer to home. And pretty much most of my photography these days is done within 4 or 5 miles of the house. Now, of course, there are good times of the year or better times of the year to photograph interesting things. The middle of summer when it's full of tourists isn't my ideal scenario for going out to feel creative, but I can be creative in other ways, whether it's with a guitar, a keyboard, or writing. What I would really like to think that you can get out of this video is realizing that all the heavy lifting goes on inside our heads. We take our expectations with us when we pack our cameras and get on a plane or pack our car to go out for sunrise. Our expectations determines our relationship with the location that we are going to and will ultimately shape the entire experience that you have there. I know too many aspiring photographers or people setting out on their photographic development who just get horribly, horribly frustrated, feeling that unless they achieve the predetermined result that they have seen somebody else achieving, that they have somehow failed. I've heard it thousands of times. I've had people in workshops who were just committed to achieving a very specific goal and they ignored every other thing in the landscape. I would like to hope the Expressive Photography channel is something that encourages you to explore, first of all, your local areas, and secondly, if you do choose to travel further afield for your photography, to go there with an open mind and a sense of acceptance for what the conditions are going to be when you get there. If they're not conducive to making photographs, there has to be another reason to be there that is going to be satisfying. If everything is hanging on the quality of the photographs you make, I think ultimately your life will be filled and consumed with increasing amounts of frustration. And personally, that's not what I aspire to, and I don't think anybody does. As always, thank you very much for watching. I hope you find this of value and a little bit thought-provoking, just to poke you in the head to just think, are you honest with yourself? Are you being entirely honest with yourself? And what is your motive and inspiration for actually being in the landscape in the first place? Talk to you again next week, where we'll be diving into creativity envy. Bye for now.